I heard the doorbell ring, and as I looked through the peephole, I discovered my father-in-law standing outside. Mr. Norrington! Why in the world was he here, when just up until yesterday he was literally at death's door? In a panic, I called up my husband. Stephen, where are you right now?
I'm in my dad's hospital room. Don't freaking call me right now.
I finally found out that my husband had been lying to me this whole time. Lying to me using his own family as a means. That is totally unforgivable. My name is Katie, and I'm 32 years old. I married my husband, Stephen, an eccentric businessman, in an arranged marriage, and we now have a son that just recently had his first birthday. Our house is a nice little building with a front and backyard, and it was built more than 20 years ago. The house itself was the property of Stephen's parents, who were substantially wealthy, but for the last 5 years, they've been giving us the kindness of allowing us to live here together as a married couple. It has 2 stories, and with it, bay windows and prominent second-story semicircular balcony. It donned a Western appearance on the outside. It was the kind of house that caught the eye of passerbys pretty often. However, you could argue the house had way too many rooms, and most of them had large, stately doors. There were lots of unnecessary steps too, and as my in-laws got older, the house became increasingly difficult to live in. That's why they moved out into a large apartment with lots of facilities designed for retired people to live easier. Our old house had a lot of stairs and steps, and the yards are both pretty spacious and hard to manage for old folks like us. That house was maybe right for us in the past, but not anymore, unfortunately.
Ever since we moved to the apartment we live in now, moving around the place in general has become a lot easier. Not to mention the cleaning and the vacuuming and stuff like that. The pain in my lower back's been getting better these days, too. But we just couldn't go through with getting our old house destroyed. We lived there for close to 20 years after all. Taking care of it will be a bit of a hassle. Oh, but it would mean a good deal to us if you accepted our offer of you two living there.
It is a beautiful house. To think of living here makes me so excited. We'll gladly live here. Thank you so much.
I'm going to be away from the house most of the time because of work, but if you want to move in, I'm all for it.
That house is one that's packed with in-laws' memories of fond, olden days, and that's why I live there and try my best to take care of it. It may be old and spacious, but I never fail to clean and polish it as best as I can. I also planted various seasonal flowers and herbs in the garden to keep its liveliness, and made sure it was a great joy to behold it as I cooked in the kitchen. Having tea time in the garden with my in-laws when they occasionally came to visit had become a bit of a thing to look forward to for me. My, I must say the tea you prepare for us is absolutely incredible, dear.
The garden looks stunning, too. How are you managing to keep the house in such good shape?
Oh, stop, you're too kind. The garden had always been splendid, and cleaning is actually one of my hobbies. It's a house that gives me the chance to do what I love doing every day. To tell you the truth, I actually lost both of my parents at a young age, and I've been mostly alone for most of my life. Stephen's parents were my legitimate in-laws, but they were the closest thing to real parents that I ever had. Ever since I started getting to know their son while I was still working full-time 7 or 8 years ago, they were concerned about how I was, and did all kinds of acts of kindness for me. Then, eventually began to think I was the right woman for Stephen, and made arrangements for us to get married. As the son of the president of a large enterprise, Stephen was heir to the position once his father retired, and made me think he was a gem unattainable for someone like me, which is why that I stubbornly didn't really want to talk about marrying him at first. But then, Stephen himself told me he was having this relationship with me under the assumption we were going to get married in the end.
Dad had been telling me you were a very respectable person, and that got me intrigued. I kept on wondering, who is this woman that's impressing my dad so much? If you're okay with it, I'd like for us to be together, please.
Only if you're all right with it being with me. Stephen never exploited his social authority in the relationship, meaning he was very fair and willing to compromise, and otherwise he was sweet, caring, kind, everything I'd hoped to find in a man. We got married later on, amidst enthusiastic congratulations from so many kind people. Afterwards, he got increasingly busy as he started taking over some of Mr. Norrington's smaller enterprises, and he often came home pretty late at night. Marriage caused me to leave my job and switch to a housewife, and I dedicated myself to making good food for Stephen and support our life together in whatever way I could.
I'm so blessed to call you my wife, Katie. There's no way I couldn't have come to where I am now without your help, and I don't know I could have if I wound up with someone else.
Aw, you're so sweet, darling, and thank you very much for always trying your best for yourself and for us. Now, how about a nice cup of coffee?
Blushing a bit, are we?
I just knew you were pulling my leg, Stephen Norrington.
Maybe just a bit, but I'm mostly dead serious.
Stephen is what you would call a worker bee, always working as hard as he could, and was often concerned with how the company was doing, even on his days off. But he was also the kind of person who never failed to show immense appreciation for everyone around him who helped him even a tiny bit. In due time, I found out I was pregnant. I was worried the morning sickness would make me unable to do the housework as well as I could, but fortunately, it was pretty mild, so I was able to clean and cook without forcing myself very much at all. I assured Stephen and the Norringtons I was fine and did everything I usually did, including the laundry and the garden work too. I was as sprightly as a child treated with some sugar. Our baby turned out to be a boy. We named him Caleb. After he was born, Mrs. Norrington, my mother-in-law, stopped by a little more frequently and helped me out with raising Caleb. It was a very kind gesture indeed, considering the fact she lived a good 20 to 30 minutes away driving. I didn't have a home to look up to for help, so I was very grateful for my in-laws' kindness. I sometimes got pretty stressed, it being my first time raising my child, but I always did my best to never cause Stephen any trouble. The most concerning thing was the fact that Caleb's crying all night was a real doozy, and that could cause Stephen insomnia. There were nights where I brought Caleb away from the bedroom, down into the kitchen, and pulled an all-nighter doing what I could to calm him down. Perhaps Stephen began to worry about me, because he said to me one night,
There's an apartment that can be rented for a week at a time, so I'm going to sleep there for a bit. A baby's job is to cry, basically, right? And I'm more worried about you and your health, because you're staying up too long for my sake pretty often. I think it's for the best that I sleep down there for a short while.
I'm sorry I'm such a useless wife.
Oh, come on now. Where'd that come from? This is just a phase, honey. Caleb's gonna calm down after a while, and then we can sleep together, the three of us. One big, happy family. It'll be over soon. Trust me.
I believed he was absolutely right. It had only been about a month since we started raising Caleb, and it was just the first phase. That's all it was. No need to get upset over being powerless about something for a bit. Stephen started to live in the apartment he was talking about, coming home for dinner every night, and on weekends. Since he wasn't there during the night anymore, I didn't have to get all concerned about him regarding Caleb's cries. Strangely enough, though, Caleb's night cries died away unusually quickly, and raising a child had suddenly become a lot easier. One weekend, Stephen came back home. Compared to a few weeks prior, instances of him donning an exhausted look on his face were more frequent. In an attempt to get his energy back, and as a thank you for always breaking his back for the sake of his family, I always made him food he loved for dinner every night. Caleb's been growing fast, and every time his daddy came home, he would be in the most adorable mood known to mankind. He must know who his daddy is, even if he's not there. Whenever Stephen was spending time with his son, his exhausted expressions faded away too, and he looked so happy it made my eyes sting.
Come on now, buddy. Say daddy. Can you say daddy?
Dada.
Oh, did you hear that, honey? A dada. Oh, this kid's got some brains. Okay, now, buddy, can you say, I love daddy? I love daddy.
Dada.
As a wife and a mother, it was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. A father and his newborn son talking to each other and smiling. But I started to notice something wasn't quite right with him. A good example was that he didn't seem to be paying attention whenever I was speaking to him. I didn't know how I noticed this, but it was like he was looking at me but not seeing me, so to speak. He seemed pretty pensive, a lot more so compared to a few weeks prior, and it wasn't the face he donned whenever he was looking at work. That was only certain thing, from what I could see. By the time Caleb was 10 months old, most of his diet consisted of baby food, and his night cries had dwindled away almost completely. Times when I was able to sleep well became more frequent, and I started thinking about telling Stephen to move back in. I think it's about time you came back to live with us, honey. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I do. It's about time, for real.
Caleb never cries at night anymore. Thought it was finally time.
He doesn't, eh? Good. Yep, I think it's time I move back in.
Something about his responses didn't sound natural. Some of his words were slurred together. More recently, Stephen was sometimes unable to come back home for the weekend because of work. Additionally, times when he didn't answer me when I called him became more common, and during the times he did come home, he spent most of his time on his phone. One day, when I was taking care of his bags after he came home from work for the weekend, I discovered a piece of clothing that I did not recognize. It was a white open-collared shirt, and it was too small to be Stephen's. Judging from where the buttons were, I confirmed the shirt was made for a woman. I always got his stuff ready for work whenever he was home from the night before, so I never failed in recognizing every single thing that went in his bags. What made things somewhat more suspicious was that it seemed to have been shoved in with his underwear on purpose. I instantly felt like someone had poured a bucket of ice-cold water all over me. I started to see a shadow looming over my husband, a shadow of a woman, and it wasn't mine. And it was one that was pretty annoying because she was quite literally in my face at the moment. Or rather, her clothes were. Of course, I was so angry with my husband, but I had Caleb to consider, and told myself I just had to calm down and proceed with caution. In the event I became emotional and demanded a divorce as a result, that would mean I'd be taking a darling boy away from his father. I decided that the first thing to do was to find out who this woman was exactly. The place where the act of treason was committed was most probably the apartment where he was staying for a while. I pondered lurking around there, hoping to catch what I was looking for, but carrying around a baby posed some obvious problems. I didn't have a spare key to his apartment, so I couldn't just waltz in either. For me at the time, it turned out to be pretty difficult for me to be around the building. Every weekend, Stephen came home. He brought home another piece of clothing that I didn't recognize, and it made me wonder if the woman was trying to give herself away to her own act of treason. Stephen is a rather careless person when it comes to small details in his surroundings, so I'm pretty sure he never noticed these pieces of clothing he brought home. I then decided to set in motion a plan to quickly get him away from the apartment, and it went like this. Hey, honey, I was thinking that maybe I could go to that apartment of yours. I just realized I've never been there, and I kind of want to check it out.
Wait, huh?
Perhaps he was pretty surprised at that, because he made a noise that sounded like a duck trying to win a game of Who's Louder against a donkey. Why not? Caleb's not too much of a hassle anymore, and I kinda want to do more for you. Work around here is getting pretty sparse, with Miss Norrington helping me out and all. Stephen sounded pretty shell-shocked when he answered to what I said.
What? You don't have to do any of the cleaning for me, sweetheart. It's already taken care of. Anyway, the cleaning lady taking care of it. I mean, you don't have to take the trouble, honey. For real. I'm totally fine.
He was so surprised with this unexpected situation that he didn't seem to realize he was digging his own grave right then. The house cleaning lady that he mentioned suspiciously sounded like a woman, potentially one, responsible for mixing in her shirts and underwear and in his clothes on purpose. I used this plan multiple times, and he eventually moved back home in a panicked manner. Mission accomplished! I was now pretty sure his lover was feeling pretty defeated by now, and I felt some weight lift off from my shoulders. But that didn't last long, because Stephen then started going away on the weekends, claiming it was because he had business trips. And when I looked through his stuff after he came back from these alleged business trips, lo and behold, I found some things that I just didn't recognize. These were far more confirming: lipstick, eyeshadow, nail polish, and other items of makeup. I even found a couple strands of long brown hair pressed into Stephen's clothes. My hair is blonde. This bitch really wanted to let me know she was moving in on my husband. As for Stephen himself, he wasn't exactly distracted from anything because of his affair, but instead looked pretty haggard. One day, a woman whose voice I didn't recognize suddenly called our landline. "Hey, darling, you're the wife of that president, aren't you? I suppose you know who I am by now, don't you?" It literally took a microsecond to realize I was actually talking to the woman with whom Stephen was cheating on me. I quickly pressed the recording button and went on to speak with her. May I ask who this is exactly?" "Aw, who do you think it is, darling?" "I'm hanging up if this is a prank call, miss." "Now just hold on a second, honey. So you're an orphan, aren't you? You must think yourself pretty lucky to have married the president of an enterprise, huh?" "I'm afraid I don't understand what you mean. Try repeating what I said. I mean it literally. I don't know which pigsty you dug yourself out of, but do you honestly think someone with a pathetic past with the likes of you deserves to live in a nice house? A little bitch with loads of suspicion and ambiguity that you are. Get the hell out of that house." That Karen only said that one little line, which was completely devoid of all logic and kindness, and hung up immediately. It was then that I got pretty scared and decided that telling my in-laws was the best thing to do. The last thing I wanted was for them to worry about me, but I also felt pretty lonely and powerless when I thought about dealing with this alone. However, when I tried calling my in-laws, they never answered. I even tried calling each of their cell phones, only to discover I can't connect to them. It was like their phones were shut off. After a while, though, I did get a phone call, but it was from Stephen, and it was a call that informed me Mr. Norrington had collapsed and was now under hospitalization. I was so shocked to hear the news and told him I was going to be ready to hightail it over there to the hospital. But then, Mrs. Norrington, who was apparently there with him too, took his phone and said, "He has a bunch of tests to run, sweetie, including the continuous observation the doctors advised he needed. He's going to be in hospital for about a week. You had young Caleb take care of Katie, so I don't think you coming to the hospital is a good idea. And Mr. Norrington's saying the last thing he wants is cause you any trouble, too. So please, wait at home and hope for good news, okay?"
I know you're worried, honey, but please, do what Mom told you. I'll call you back later.
I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I consider my in-laws the closest thing to my actual parents. I was about to throw up with concern for Mr. Norrington's health, but I luckily kept my cool and agreed that what he needs right now is rest, and no daughter-in-laws bothering him. I hugged Caleb as I told him, "Let's hope that Grandpa gets better soon, okay, darling?" I felt like I was saying this more to myself than Caleb. The next day, the same woman who threatened me yesterday called again. "Oh my, you're still at that house, are you? I thought I told you to get the hell out." You have no right to tell me where I can and cannot live. Who do you think you are? You really think you can talk to me in that tone, bitch? I'm the future wife of a company president and the rightful owner of that house. Excuse me? You're cursing that majestic building with your existence and your blood of the devil. If you don't want anything to happen to you, or that frickin' fetus of yours, for the last time, get the hell out! I was frozen with fear. Later on, I got a call from my husband with an update on how Mr. Norrington's doing. Turns out, he was at death's door, and the initial period of hospitalization of about a week was lengthened by only goodness knows how long. All I knew was that he wasn't gonna be coming home for a while.
Listen to me, honey. You're not to call me until this whole thing settles down, all right? When I get the news that Dad's healthy enough to leave the hospital, I'll let you know. Promise me, please.
The situation seemed desperate because Stephen's voice cracked multiple times. I had so much negativity dogpiling my mind right now. I was so concerned about Mr. Norrington, and there was Stephen's bitch that just scared me half to death. Another night bites the dust, and I just couldn't sleep a wink. The next day, I heard the doorbell to my house ring, and as I looked through the peephole, I discovered my father-in-law standing outside. Mr. Norrington! Why in the world was he here, when just up until yesterday, he was literally at death's door? I quickly opened the door and let him inside. He seemed the picture of health, and not at all like the Mr. Norrington I envisioned having tubes in his arms and a respirator on his face. His skin wasn't pale in the slightest, and his stride was as graceful as it ever was. Are you all right, Mr. Norrington? I was told you collapsed and that you were in the hospital right now.
Oh, it was just a case of asthma, dear. I have low blood pressure and sometimes it makes me dizzy, but there's no cause for alarm. I'm completely all right now. I heard from Mom that you were worried about me, and I hightailed over here as soon as I left the hospital.
It turned out that Mr. Norrington felt dizzy and went to the doctor to get it checked out 3 days ago. He was diagnosed with a mild case of anemia, or low blood pressure. Further tests revealed a polyp in his large intestine. They found a few hemorrhoids too, and they were bleeding a fair amount, and they decided that was the cause of the anemia. Along the intestinal examinations, they conducted a procedure called a polypectomy and took care of the polyp real quick. That's why he was able to quickly recover and left the hospital that day. Oh my, so you had some intestinal trouble and some hemorrhoids too. I'm so glad you're okay, Mr. Norrington.
Oh, hush, dear. I'll be honest, though. Talking about problems with my ass makes me feel a wee strange. I'm sorry to have worried you, my dear.
As the relief settled in, I suddenly remembered my husband. And what's going on with Stephen, sir? I heard he was with you the whole time you were in the hospital.
Huh? No, he didn't. That boy just signed a couple of documents authorizing the medical test and just left quickly afterwards. He never paid me a visit even once. Hang on. Is something the matter, Katie? You suddenly look so pale.
I felt the blood run to my face. In a panic, I called up my husband. So, Stephen, where are you right now?
I'm in my dad's hospital room. Don't freaking call me right now.
He hung up immediately. I finally found out that my husband had been lying to me this whole time. The reason why he was lying to me was blatantly obvious. He was trying to hide his affair. Mr. Norrington, curious about what had just happened between us, kindly showed me his concern about the situation, sat me down, and urged me to tell him everything. And I told him everything indeed. I told him his own son was having an affair. I told him about the very scary phone calls I got the last 2 days from the woman whom he's cheating with. I played the recordings back at him, and it revealed everything he needed to know. He let out a furious grunt, and his fists were clenched so tight his knuckles turned white.
Miss Katie, I don't want to believe it, but I'm afraid I recognize that woman's voice.
Really? Who is it?
She was a female employee working the lowest position in the secretary department of my company headquarters when I was still in office as president. I personally talked to her a few times, and she was a sweet girl. To think she was actually this sort of character.
Why would Stephen want to have an affair with an abominable bitch like her?
This is unacceptable. I'm never going to forgive her blasphemy. You, Katie, blood of the devil? Your parents are undoubtedly the most amazing, courageous people, my dear, and I would love to meet them. Any language that means to dishonor you and your family will never be tolerated.
It was sweet of him to get angry for my sake, but I wondered why he was especially angry at how the woman insulted my deceased parents. I thought he would be furious when he found out his own son was having an affair. Mr. Norrington, could it be that you know my parents? Or do you actually not know the truth? Fast forward 3 days. Stephen came back from his trip abroad with his new sweetheart, only to find the house locked up and deserted. A sign that read, "For sale," hung on the front gate. You might be wondering by now, what the heck is going on? Good question. I actually moved out of the house, taking Caleb with me, and currently residing in another nice house. The building had top-notch security systems, and I was feeling safe for the first time in a while. All of Stephen's belongings were given to the moving company to hold on to until he came back. His voice sounded extremely panicked when he called me.
What's going on here? You better explain things clearly so I can understand what the meaning of this is.
Why don't you ask yourself why this frickin' happened, Stephen?
Oh, wait. Hang on. Don't tell me you know everything.
It's Allegra from the security department, isn't it? Mr. Norrington told me everything.
Wait, what? Dad knows about this too? Wasn't he supposed to be hospitalized for a week at least?
I'm not talking to you ever again, and I'm sure as hell not gonna answer your stupid questions. You want answers? You could talk to your parents, who are beside themselves with anger and disappointment right now, by the way. I didn't give him a chance to respond and hung up immediately. It's only natural my husband was so surprised to discover the truth as soon as he returned home, because the house really was sold to someone else. Mr. Norrington was the one who suggested the idea. The things that Allegra had said to me over the phone were so threatening and made us all fear the worst so much that I just had to be evacuated. Her unnatural desire to live in the house was also very eerie and unsettling. I wasn't completely convinced she would inflict harm upon me and Caleb, but Mr. Norrington genuinely believed she would. He sternly urged me to move out of the house as early as possible. This idea was so unexpected, it left me speechless, and my mouth was open like a codfish for a solid minute or two.
I admit it's a beautiful house that transcends time in the best of ways. But what's even more important is you and young Caleb. Nothing is more precious than family, and I would volunteer to go homeless if it meant protecting mine. My wife will understand. We will be doing this to protect you after all.
Mrs. Norrington was equally shell-shocked when she heard everything from her husband. And that boy promised he would make our dear Katie happy. What a disgrace. Of course, living in that house would spell nothing but danger. I agree. I think we should get rid of it as quick as we can. It's a small price to pay when it comes to the safety of Katie and darling Caleb. Why are you being so good to me? I'm only the mere wife of your son, you know. I don't understand what I did to deserve this much kindness.
I think it's time you know, Katie. A long time ago, before you were born, we were going through some pretty tough times, and your parents helped us so much. They were the sole reason my company didn't go bankrupt. It may be doing pretty well nowadays, but even it went through rough patches in the past, and my business skills were never very good. It was bad enough that we contemplated we ended all as a family, our Stephen included. It's not something I like to bring up.
Mr. Norrington's confession shocked me.
Your father, Katie, offered us his support, even though he was also going through some hardships himself. And the company got back on its feet because of him, and business started looking up before long. We wanted to offer our paycheck and our deepest gratitudes, and we set out to find your family.
My parents passed away successively when I was in middle school. They were both diagnosed with an illness. Mr. Norrington, you mustn't fret about something that happened so long ago. I'm afraid we must, dear. We heard that because they offered us their support. Their lives became even harder when it was up until then. We found out they'd passed after some time searching, but we also found out their daughter was being cared for in a nursing home. We found you soon afterwards. But we were completely convinced you'd hate us because we were pretty much the sole reason why our parents couldn't make it through. I assure you, Mrs. Norrington, I don't feel anything close to that whatsoever. Even when life was hard as a family, my parents offered me everything they could, and I have nothing but fond memories of them. I managed to receive a decent amount of scholarship money from the nursing home, and I was able to go to school without any trouble even after they passed. I realized something right as I finished saying that sentence. But when I was in middle school, I was offered a scholarship from an economic organization that didn't need to be paid back. The money allowed me to pursue my interests beyond middle school, and I went on to high school and to college too. Don't tell me the people who provided the money were standing right in front of me. So it was you two, my anonymous guardian angels. They were you. During this time of family crisis, with an impending divorce with my husband, I finally discovered how much my in-laws loved me, an orphan schoolgirl, and supported me exactly like how my own parents would have done. Later on, Stephen suffered the consequences of using his own family, probably the most important thing he had as a person, as a means to conceal the truth of his love affair. His parents lectured him severely, and he could do nothing to redeem himself. How he wound up having an affair was fairly simple. When he moved into that apartment when Caleb was being a big problem at night, he obviously had some difficulties taking care of his place. Allegra, from the secretary department, volunteered to help him out, and, over time, her feelings for him started to grow more passionate. Being the kind-hearted guy that he is, Stephen thanked her for her help and asked what she wanted as a repayment. She jumped at the opportunity, and he had the audacity to confess his feelings for him, and they slept together, promising each other it was just a one-time thing. I guess every personality trait, no matter how positive it might be, must always have an instance where it becomes a curse. Stephen regretted the act hugely and asked for her to break up with him on numerous occasions, and every single time, Allegra told him that she just wanted to see him one more time, and even after that, whenever the topic of conversation turned to the subject of breaking up, she would hint at suicide and also at harming his wife and his son. The slime bag pretty much blackmailed him into an unwanted relationship, and Stephen didn't step away from the situation. Mr. Norrington would have none of his son's excuses, and told him sternly that he has to clean up whatever mess he created. Allegra found out about the house she longed for didn't belong to Stephen anymore, and she apparently ran away from the relationship. Mr. Norrington, being the founder of the company which Stephen is now its president, pulled some strings and managed to get Allegra transferred to a remote area for work. Now, I hear she's living in an old crumbling dorm adjacent to her job, and every month, she continues to pay the large amount of compensation she owes me. As for me, I'm currently not divorced with Stephen yet. To be honest, there were many things about him that I couldn't forgive, but the fact that he would never be able to see his son Caleb again genuinely hurt him more than anything else. He's continuously begged for my forgiveness, knowing full well he's never going to get it, but I did notice that my anger for him was fading away, slowly but surely. My in-laws promised me that even if I do divorce their son, they would still continue to look after me, as though I was their own daughter. I eventually did forgive a lot of Stephen's weaknesses, because I really do believe he has what it takes to give his son the full, happy life he deserves. It's not that we're back together as husband and wife, but I am willing to take time to readjust, and then maybe One day, we'll be able to live under the same roof again.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. president of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.